Up to now?
Right now what we're doing is we're going to install our bearings and check our clearance. We're not torquing, we're untorquing, that's why it's beeping at us. And yes, you can do that with this wrench, it's fine, I'll snap one. So what we do is pop it loose there, we spin them out, we snap some bearings in.
And for the individual that messaged me on Facebook, aluminum soft jaw.
We don't like wrecking rods either. I feel you. So these bearings have an upper and a lower, and on this case they look the same. A lot of times the tabs won't line up, so we're going to check here. And this one is upper. Now when you're assembling that, you want to make sure that the upper goes in the rod part. Upper goes in the rod, same as in the block. The upper is always facing the top of the engine. You can probably see upper right there on the part number, or in this etched in there. So we snap this in there. Try not to touch the face of these. These are tri-metal, that's why we're not wearing gloves, because they're not as sensitive as a different types of coated bearing, but the oils in your skin will actually imprint. If you take a gray bearing and put your finger on there, you'll see the mark forever. So I pop that in there, and we roll it into the tab. And grab a lower. Yep, lower. And install that into the cap side. Of course, you saw earlier in the other videos where we checked the rods themselves. We also have to check our bearings to make sure that we're going to have the proper clearance between the crank and the bearing. So there's oil that's to flow in there, because what it's called is a hydrodynamic bearing, so it actually rides on a film of oil. The bearing should never actually touch. They should actually be ride on the oil. So that's why I have to make sure the clearance is right, so hydraulically it works to hold the rod off the bearing off the crankshaft. Touch it down gently. I like this snap-on screwdriver because it has a clutch, so you can't actually over torque it. Then 30 foot-pounds. Of course, this will change depending on what you're working on. And then this is an angle wrench as well, so you might notice we're not marking our angles. Take the angle, spin it until it beeps. If you're doing this at home, you can use a breaker bar and figure out your marks on the rod. So now, I checked the calibration on this. I want to make sure that we are right at, stay in there now. We get her sitting just in the middle and sweep through. We should be seeing about 26. We got 26 and change, so that should be all right. Spec calls for 7/10 to 2 9/10, so there's a bit of a window there, but it still runs fairly tight. Okay, so these are not being very nice to get in there. We got to fight them a little bit. So trying to work above our rubber mat just in case I do slip. It does slip out of my hand because it hits the ground, and of course that's never good for anything. So I'm trying to work our way in here. I put a bit of tension on and roll it in. You want to make sure that your end is over from here, so that way you can get it out again later, so you can actually pop it out and go right into there and try and force it, just like that one was easier.
So what he's talking about at the end, guys, is there's a little notch there, and anybody that's worked with snap rings will know that if the edges line up there, you're gonna fight it getting out.
There's a bit of this melting lube. Never push these in dry because they'll actually gall. I have actually, sometimes you go to, you'll see, oh, you want to see if it fits or whatever. If they come out of the box dry, it'll actually jam up in there because the clearance between your pin and your piston is very, very tight. So give that a bit of a spin. We take our qualified rod or checked out rod or whatever. Take that there. We're going to take our so this groove on this chamfer. This is all the odd pistons, so it'll be the left side of the engine, all our odd side pistons, and they're gonna the heavy chamfer goes to the outside edge of the crank. So these are all front, so they'll all be the same on the one side. That's why we go 1, 3, 5, and 7. So we're gonna basically make sure that this is gonna line up correctly with the piston. This is on the intake side, so the upper. So I'll make sure I have my chamfer sitting in the engine like this. So when you imagine it all going together like that, you want to make sure your rod goes correctly onto the piston, or you will have clearance issues. It will not run. So you take all that, flip it over. Like that, and just remember which side this is on. We give us another dab of this amazing assembly lube. Thank you, Joe, for changing my life.
and I didn't talk about it in the last video because I edited it out. I ended up getting Robin hooked on this Mel lube from Melling. He's been an advocate of some cheaper lube, and not that this is expensive.
It's not even the price. It's just this stuff seems to work really, really well. And I mean, Joe's gonna have this thing together probably what, 2 weeks ish. So I mean, I think that I don't want the engine sitting around for 2 weeks without 2 weeks without sitting around. I know he's not gonna have it done in 2 weeks. We're just giving him a hard time.
Yeah, I would love to say it'll be up and running in 2 weeks, but it's cold. I have a nice heated shop, but I'm not driving it.
This one here. Oh, twist it a little more. A little trickier once you get the rod in there. Hey, you'll see lots of times we clamp the rod in the vise, but I don't like to clamp it on this end because then it has a chance of falling out. It can also just deform this end. So otherwise you might think, why don't you just clamp it in the vise and do it that way? I don't like doing that on that end that way with little automotive rods. Get her up in there. You bugger.
It went together. The other one went together this way easier, and the first one was a little more difficult.
Yep. And there we go. So I get that. And come on now. Of course, I try not to disturb the rings too much either when you're holding it. Make sure just like that. Yeah, it's not quite enough on there. Just like that. 2. And you see how I'm laying them down? What we're doing is I'm actually laying them on the flat side here. This is not laying against my bench. That way we can't actually disturb these rings if we bump them or something like that. They're just hanging over the edge, again on our rubber bench. Like that. That way we know they're not going to get damaged, sitting like that.
Anyways, guys, so we're going to continue on. More hands-free filming from the Insta360. Probably the cell phone if I can find an angle, but we'll go from there.
You see we're just putting a bit of oil on the bottom side because we're just threading these in. They're only going to thread them down just until they're snug, and we want the threads to go in smooth. And now if you look at this, if you look at the threads here as well, the fine threads go up, and these are the original stock metric threads that will go into the block.
A good point he just brought up on that is there's a reason that you don't use the factory torque spec that these studs are going to come. So most people will look, oh, I can just look at the factory. Well, we're doing ARPs. I have overkill. I'm ARP studs on the mains. I'm ARP on the heads. A lot of guys, when in the horsepower category I'm going to be in, would 100% get away with stock. Check. Stock replacement was, call it, this was 20% above what a stock replacement would have cost. So to me, it was worth the investment. And I can say I'm fully ARP'd.
Yeah, so what you guys want to look at is that when you're going through to put these together, the one with the oil hole, because the oil has to go to the crankshaft from through the block, so it's going to come through this hole here. Basically, there'll be a gallery that feeds this and also feeds our cam bearings. You see in the previous video when we installed those. So when you're putting them in there, you want to make sure that there's a hole that lines up and that goes on the block side. Cap side bearing has no oil groove. It's completely closed off. I don't know why they're marked C. That's an interesting one for me. We'll figure that out. But yeah, that goes on the cap side because it has no passage for the oil bearing. So that just goes right in the cap. One sense, it's say don't torque 100 foot-pounds on one side.
What?
You only have to say about common sense. It's not so common. Sometimes if you're working by yourself, you can flip this block up on side and they won't be working against the sliding.
It's always the first one to decide to slide, right?
Yep. Well, and when we do our full 100, that'll be a different story.
Yeah, we'll need Kyle's hand at that point if I'm going to try and film it.
Yep.
So for anybody wondering, there is a special, not crow's foot, but it is kind of a crow's foot.
If you look at it, you think, man, how on earth do they expect you to torque? You might need some fancy-dancy snap-on job. Well, this one is snap-on. It is a, whatever the part number is, but they do make them. They exist, and yeah, that's what you can use. I'm sure you can get them from someone else other than Snap-on, but don't have to use it very often. When you do, you're glad you got it.
There is something to say about buying Snap-on because they will come to your shop. When's the last time Mastercraft came to your shop to replace a tool?
The other thing too, when you're using these, you want to make sure that this tool is at a 90 degree to your ratchet head because you'll over torque it if it's straight. So I'll make sure it's at a 90 degree, just like that, to the head of the ratchet.
Huh. Cool.
Another trick to try and keep this stuff off your hands, because like never sees it gets on everything. It's worse than anything you can imagine for that. Butter the washer, not the nut, and then otherwise you could butter this and be the same, but then it gets all over your fingers. Just like a tip.
I learned that one on my diesel. This is why he was cursing you guys, because he was like, where the fuck is this thing?
You found it? Yep.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Oh. 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 What? That broke. That was a snap-on side of the equation. That was a snap-on side of that. Snap-on's not always better. Arlos! Arlos, I need you now! Into that.
Well, the nice part is it is going to be the last one, so we can actually.
We still put the crank in.
We got to put the crank in. We haven't done the torque check.
So, yeah, so that measure it. We'll take it apart, and then we'll get it in there. We'll finish torquing once I get the snap-on chart to make an appearance on a not stat holiday.
I can't make this shit up. This is.
No. Probably got a Mastercraft on this around the summer still.
This is the stuff, guys, that I have tried to explain to people. Like, there is a certain, like, Phil's gonna laugh. Like, Phil, if you're watching this, actually, you're probably gonna hear about it tonight. You just can't make this shit up. This is how my life works.
Everything breaks.
Like, everything breaks.
And it's not like it was a Chinesium freaking adapter.
No.
I've had that thing for 11 years.
So this is where, like, when we did the diesel, somebody's like, you didn't just really snap a stud off in the block. I did. I snapped a freaking ARP off in the block. The torque wrench is broken. We fucked up. But this time the tool fucked up.
Yeah.
Technically, we've had 2 tool failures on this block. 2.
You wonder how we spend so much money on tools. That's why, because they still break.
This is, we talked about it in a Discord on Twitch the other night, the why a person buys ARP, or was it a Facebook post? Or not ARP, Snap-on. Because at the end of the day, that's going to get replaced for free, and Snap-on Arlos will come out to the shop. Yes, and I am wearing the most perfect shirt ever today, which is fuck 2020.
It's almost over,
Like,
but they did film, what movie was that? Mad Max?
Mad Max
in 2021.
In 2021, yeah. We are not far off from a prospect of being real. So, like, it's comical. Like, it's just, I cannot make this shit up. Like, just, God. Okay, so we were talking about the oil squirt is not lined up. So this one, one small, actually I'll turn the flash on.
Yeah, so these two here, we couldn't find any visible hits on them, and they also look like they're in line the way they should be with the piston. Whereas this one here, you can tell that you can see the marks on the back of it right on here. And also you want to look at it, compare that one to that one, and it's actually at a slightly different angle, which can cause it to line up with the piston in an incorrect fashion.
And then this one took the big hit.
That one took a bad hit there, so that's probably, I could actually start to crimp it off on the inside. It's just not worth taking the risk for a $40 part like that, because if it does come apart, you lose oil pressure, and lose oil pressure in the bottom end, which we all know is just no good.
So this is where I was talking, guys, like, I tore this apart, and in June kind of went, I don't think I can just justify just doing pistons. We wouldn't even have found this doing just pistons. Legit, wouldn't even have pulled the crank just to do pistons. It's just that little extra step. This might cost me $80. I'm going to find out parts availability. Just another delay, but I'm not prone to it at this point. I kind of just know to expect the worst when it comes to it now.
Well, that's why it's good to go through stuff with a fine-tooth comb and really pay attention when you're putting it to something small like this. Yeah, you might have been able to take a risk on it, and it might have ran or it might not have. But if it didn't, you'd sure feel bad if it didn't run.
So that's pretty much going to end the video for today. Not exactly how I want to end it, but we did get the checking bearing clearances. We were checking torque. We're gonna probably put the caps on because they're already got the bearings installed, and then the bearings are gonna stay in place. Unfortunately, it's just more things sitting out. As you can tell here, all 8 rods, pistons are all assembled, ready to go. They're gonna have to sit until we get everything again. We are getting there, guys. We are making headway. As much as it doesn't seem like it, little things. It's kind of a blessing in disguise. I guess breaking that tool was kind of a small hint anyway that maybe something else was going on. As weird as that sounds, but there's ominous to that usually.
Yeah.
Tool breaking, and now we're have another part broken. The oil jets were the last thing out of the block, and I honestly was getting the block out the door at that point and didn't even think twice about actually getting to even look at them, because I pulled them out, and to me, on first pull, they looked fine, but they're not. We're going to replace 2. 2 are look perfectly fine. Like I said, there was quite a bit of, Robin noted, quite a bit of debris just in the bottom of the oil pan, like when that lifter blew up. So, and that's a failed cam, and I'm going to bring out the cams on the next video, where I'm going to show the flaking on the factory cam, the failed cam from being ground, and the reality is it broke, and it had 3 kilometers on it, and just some testing, like what's going on. Honestly thought I had burned a hole down at one point. So anyways, guys, stay running off road. I'll see you on the next one.